sees the world star John Walker of Hull needing a big finish to beat Keith Naylor of Scunthorpe and go into our semi-final.
It's December 1970, and Yes are on tour in a cold and bleak northern England. Tonight, they hit the bright lights of Hull. The show sees them supported by folk rock band The Strawbs, and for the first time, Yes get to see the acclaimed keyboard star of tomorrow, Rick Wakeman. Wakeman's reputation had been rising throughout 1970, with the music press sensing that this keyboard virtuoso was destined for bigger things. It's not hard to see why, and watching him playing along to the Strawbs swaying Ye Olde Fair in smoky pubs seems really jarring with our hindsight. One can almost sense Rick just dreaming of donning his cape and becoming a prog rock superman, and within 6 months of this gig he would be offered that chance. Yes, meanwhile, are on tour promoting their recently released Yes album, and like many young bands of this era, the amount of shows that Yes played over this period is staggering. The first half of 1971 alone saw them play 70 shows, but it was during the US leg of that tour that tensions started to develop between the band and keyboardist Tony Kaye. His bandmates wanted Tony to embrace the newly emerging synthesizers, but he was reluctant to do so and wanted to retain the more direct and organic sound of the Hammond organ and electric piano. Added to this were the tensions that brewed between Tony and Steve Howe. During the US tour, the two shared a room together, with the quiet, yoga-loving and tofu-munching guitarist taking exception to Kaye's wilder, partying exploits. This was the same Tony Kaye, after all, who once hung out and partied with the likes of Keith Moon, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, no less.
Better man who realized alone is not a venture. Peaceful man who realized alone is no adventure, just a hideaway.
On returning to the UK, Yes played an outdoor festival in London's Crystal Palace Bowl, but unbeknown to him at the time, this would be Kaye's last performance with this incarnation of the band. The show was professionally recorded, and there is a plausible belief that live cuts from it were to be mixed in with their next studio album, creating a double release, but this never happened. The Crystal Palace show, however, did provide a lasting legacy in that it gave birth to the next album's name, and on being asked what the next Yes album would be called, manager Brian Lane is thought to have looked at a photograph of the band from this show and noticed the word fragile stencilled on one of the amps, something that perhaps reflected the band and Kaye's state at this time. Within days of Kaye's departure, Chris Squire phoned Rick Wakeman with a view to him joining the band and promptly invited him over to a rehearsal session in London's Shepherd Market, in a room above a massage parlour no less. The basic ideas for the Fragile tracks were all sketched out prior to Wakeman's arrival. However, the band has often stated how it was Wakeman's classical ear and knowledge of arrangement concepts that truly brought these tracks to life. It had been reported in the press earlier that year that Yes's next album would be recorded in Miami with the Clapton producer Tom Dowd. However, in August, they decided to move to London's Advision Studios to commence recording. Producer Eddie Offord had worked on the band's 2 previous albums, but it's this one that he finally nails the crisp and tight sound that the band were renowned for producing on stage. Offord was starting to become like a 6th member of the band at this point, and he was present at and contributed to all of the Fragile rehearsals, where he became something of a peacemaker between the band, who were renowned for their in-studio arguing and long, drawn-out decision-making. It's thought that one argument over songwriting royalties led to the idea that the Fragile album should have songs written and largely played by each member individually. Another reason for this is that it allowed them a way to quickly finish off the album rather than having another long-winded group composition. Studio time, after all, was not cheap, and what little money that they did have was needed to develop Wakeman's rapidly developing arsenal of keyboards. It was an incredibly exciting time for the band. The Yes album had been a big success, and arguably for the first time, they now had equal weight in terms of musical vision and technical expertise. Another missing piece of the Yes jigsaw that fell into place at this time was the packaging, visual identity, and wider philosophy of the band, and so enters our story one William Roger Dean. It was Atlantic Records manager Phil Carson who first noticed Dean's artwork and commissioned him to create a cover for one of the 2 bands that he managed. And it's interesting to consider that had Fragile been recorded a few months later, then Dean would have designed the cover for Led Zeppelin's 4 Symbols instead. Dean pitched the design concept to Carson of a story of a child living on a planet that was breaking apart. The child had built a Noah's Ark-type ship to escape and find a new world to live on. The story continued on future Yes sleeves as parts of the Fragile planet spawn and develop new worlds. Incidentally, one of these floating planet designs that ended up being the cover for Yes songs was originally designed by Dean for Dark Side of the Moon. The record company were initially sceptical about the actual lettering that Dean used, stating that customers wouldn't be able to read it. However, Dean astutely pointed out to them that it wasn't so much reading it that was important, but recognising it and connecting with it, and in that sense, it's perfect. Although home to all of us, Dean's world is a million miles from the photo of broken pottery that was originally designed to be this album's cover. Before we break apart Fragile and examine what makes its pieces fit together so well, it's time for an important message for all you crazy kids out there.
Hello, this is John Anderson of Yes. Leave the hard drugs alone, because they're not for our time, they're not for the city, and they're not for the people, and they're not for the young people. And it's better to leave them alone. If any of your friends are into heavy things, try and coax them out of it on a warm, friendly level. Don't join in.
The origins and meanings of this song come from the band's brief Scottish tour of March 1971, and at one point in a morning drive en route to Glasgow, a stoned John Anderson dazed out of the window and wrote down a few things that he saw, and this became the basis for these lyrics.
Call it morning, driving through the sound and in and out the valley.
In later interviews, the actual locations the band played and Anderson's recollections of the journey don't quite marry up, so it must have been some good pot. However, he has referenced at one point that the band drove past a huge lake, which he says was just outside Glasgow. So this is probably Loch Lomond and not the more famous and magical sounding Loch Ness, to which he sometimes references. That's much further north.
Along the drifting cloud, the eagle searching down on the land. Catching the swirling wind, the sailor sees the rim of the land.
Nevertheless, in and around this lake, he saw a range of mountains, probably the Trossachs, the tops of which disappeared into the clouds, as if the mountains themselves came out of the sky and just stood there. The song is driven by Squire's grooving bass, which is actually doubled up by him playing Howe's Gibson guitar to give it a more tight and dynamic feel. But perhaps the song's most bizarre ingredient is the 3-note refrain that is built into the final vocal lines, which Anderson claims was based on the 3 blind mice nursery rhyme.
Ba 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 ba. 3 blind mice, 3 blind mice.
The song has become arguably the most well-known of the band's 1970s songs and has been played live by them over 2,000 times. It was known to exist while Kay was still in the band, and original guitarist Peter Banks also has staked a claim to this song's development, stating that the original strumming riff was his. Now, this riff appears on his solo album, but although it was released after Fragile, it was partly written before it, and knowing the plagiarising nature of early Yes, he may have a genuine claim. There is a belief that Rick's 6 Wives track, Catherine of Aragon, was originally destined for the Fragile album, and it was given the aptly chosen title of Handle with Care. However, his newly created contract didn't allow him to have his own compositions on Yes albums. He chose therefore to adapt an existing copyright-free classical piece of music in Johann Brahms' 4th Symphony, 3rd movement. Rick layers 4 different types of keyboard to replace the orchestra. The concentration in doing so resulted in him spending a lot of time immersed in studio headphones, also known as cans, and has thought that this may be where the title comes from. It could, however, refer to cans of beer, with Brahms and Liszt being English rhyming slang for being pissed, as in drunk. By Rick's own admission, the results are awful, and I had to admit I agree with him. Inspired by the birth of his first daughter, Anderson's solo offering hints at the increasing way that he would combine random and unconnected words to create something more profound and spiritual than perhaps it deserves to be. Here, his series of cyclic mantras feel like a dry run for the writing style that he would ultimately peak in with his Elias of Sunhillow album.
Tell the moon, dog, tell the man, 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 tell the moon, dog, tell the man.
Many fans feel that this track is slightly too repetitive and outstays its welcome, and it seems like the band themselves may have felt this way, as the track ends with the sound of a door being abruptly slammed, as if they themselves had quite had enough of it.
No 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 no. Da da do da no na na na.
In ancient Greek mythology, Hypnos, the god of sleep, is also the brother of Thanatos, the god of death, and as such, their two states are related and intertwined with each other. Anderson has often said that the idea for South Side of the Sky came from reading an article called Sleep is Death's Little Sister, and it's another variation on this ancient Greek concept. Now, knowing where he was heading with topographic, I'd wager that what he read was the writing of Indian guru Sri Chinmoy, who had written about this concept at this time. Now, this is the same guru who incidentally gave John McLaughlin the band name Mahavishnu, and his writing was very popular with musicians at this time. With a working title of Icefire, Anderson warmed to the idea that death can be an extension of life, another stage in our soul's journey, and framed his lyrics around a doomed polar expedition. Our mountaineers are facing the very mountain of life itself, and in order to reach the other side, the south side, they have to scale one final level, the transformation from life to death itself. When people die of hypothermia, their bodies open up blood vessels in a last-ditch attempt to release heat and stay alive, and this results in them feeling warmer on that day as they finally reach the top of life's mountain, 1,000,000 miles away in all of eternity. At a mere 35 seconds, Bill Bruford's solo offering is the shortest track that the band ever recorded, and it foreshadows the offbeat and irregular realm that the drummer would soon later enjoy with King Crimson. Its original title was Suddenly It's Wednesday, and I think this is a great choice for a frenetic and unexpected opening to side 2. However, it was renamed to afford the band a sly dig at their original manager, who wound up earning 5% of the band's income for what they felt was very little work. Like most of this album's solo offerings, many fans see this as annoying filler, but personally I think it really works and it helps glue the larger parts together and contribute to making the whole of Fragile arguably greater than the sum of its individual parts. This is a perfect example of a simple idea by Anderson being transformed by the whole band into an instantly lovable and catchy song, one that masks its complex, quirky playing and offbeat time signatures. Whilst often interpreted as a love song, the lyric is partly based around Anderson's disillusionment with the uninspiring church that he visited as a child, with his long time waiting to feel the sound being his yearning to be moved onto the higher spiritual plane that he knew existed.
Long distance, run around. Long time, waiting to feel the sound.
Meanwhile, lines like hot colour melting anger to stone refers to the recent student riots and social unrest of the time, specifically the Kent University shootings in Ohio. The song was totally altered for the later Relaya tour into a slower and more reflective arrangement, and although this later version would have totally jarred on Fragile, I personally think it's actually better. The song blends seamlessly into Squire's solo offering, The Fish. This astonishing number would become Squire's trademark and grow and develop with stunning depth and maturity over the years. It was Eddie Offord who was tasked with coming up with an aquatic subtitle that had to have the right amount of syllables to fit the vocal track, and he found Chandeliera Pramatoris fit the bill. The Fish, of course, is Squire's nickname, coined by Bruford after his frustration at how long Squire would spend in the bath in the house that they shared. To showcase the elaborate way that this song is constructed, who better to speak to than Chris Squire expert, the tremendous Miguel Falcon, known by many for his wonderful Miguel-based YouTube channel. And this is what he had to show us.
The first part of The Fish consists of a series of plucked harmonics using all open strings. First, at the 12th fret, E, A, D, G, and at the 19th fret, B, E, A, D. This pattern is repeated throughout the whole piece. The main theme on Chris Squire's The Fish uses all notes from the E Dorian scale. Another track harmonizes the same melody a parallel third above. Yet another bass track provides the last note, E, which forms, along with the other two final notes, an E minor chord.
Obrigado, Miguel. Originally part of his clap song on the Yes album, Steve's solo offering is a Spanish-flavoured acoustic number that takes the listener through the various feelings that one may encounter in a day. Steve has cited flamenco guitarists like Carlos Montoya and Sabicas as the influences for this track, and he borrows a variety of different phrases, weaving them together like a Spanish medieval tapestry. Its sequencing on the Fragile album is just perfect, and it provides a welcome pause and reflection between the dense fish and the frenetic onslaught of notes that are about to come next. Sounding almost like part 2 of Southside, this epic song traverses through multiple sections, far too many to detail here individually, with multiple time signatures and rearrangements of recurring themes. In terms of structure and discipline, this is about as good as progressive rock gets. In saying that, the song does owe a huge debt to King Crimson, with its tight, well-disciplined riffs and doom-laden mellotron. Squire himself has stated that 21st Century Schizoid Man was indeed the main influence behind this song.
Lost in their eyes as you hurry by, counting the broken ties they decide.
The track is based around a palindrome-like riff, with the opening notes ascending and then descending to mirror each other. Howe stated that it evolved in the studio, and although Wakeman had a large influence on its final structure, the song was thought to have been rehearsed while Kay was still in the band, as was much of this album in fact. The images here, by the way, are from the movie Buffalo 66. Released in 1998, this brilliant film uses Heart of the Sunrise and some other prog classics to startling effect. Its director, incidentally, Vincent Gallo, is a friend of Chris Squire's and actually godfather to one of his children. There are several tracks that may have been included on Fragile but weren't. The first of these is generally referred to as All Fighters Past.
Don't you still see it from the beginning? Should we believe it? Well, that's what they're saying.
The bass and keyboard line for this would become parts of Siberian Khatru, but it's the lyrics that are most familiar to us now, as they were used in topographics revealing Science of God. Little is really known about this track, and only 3 minutes of it are known to exist. It's obviously a much longer song, but the tape was thought to have been accidentally wiped and reused at some point. The next track that would have certainly appeared on Fragile had it been a live studio hybrid is the band's version of Paul Simon's America.
Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together.
The track was originally released on Simon & Garfunkel's Bookends album in '68. However, other bands were playing it prior to this due to a demo tape of Paul Simon's being circulated at the time. One of these bands was called 123, and they played at the Marquee Club in 1967, so it's probable that this is where they got the idea for this funked up arrangement from. with Tony Kaye said to have brought the track to Yes's attention. Now, the Yes song Something's Coming already incorporated elements of Leonard Bernstein's America, and gradually this morphed into their own version of the Paul Simon number.
I said be careful, his bow tie is really a camera.
Released on an Atlantic Records sampler LP in 1972 and known to most fans as part of the Yesterdays compilation. There is much debate over exactly who plays the keyboard parts here, with even Bill Bruford being cited as playing some of them. In an obviously staged promotional video for the song, Rick Wakeman seems to be overtly joking about while he's playing, as if he's almost mocking his lack of involvement with the track. Now, if it is Rick on this recording, as some suggest, then why does he not embellish it in any way with one of his trademark keyboard flourishes? It's over 10 minutes in length, and there isn't a hint of a Wakeman solo, and I'm doubtful that he just would have simply replicated Kaye's playing note for note. Furthermore, the live versions that they played with Tony Kaye sound almost identical to this studio recording. Therefore, I'm inclined to think that this well could be Tony Kaye playing here. The song ranks as one of my favourites by this or any other band, with a bouncy, funky groove that I just never want to end. Maybe it's just being from England, but it seems to me to capture the excitement of visiting the States perfectly, which is something I really just have to do one day, as I'd love to go and count the cars on that new turnpike in Jersey. That was a joke, by the way. Fragile was released in the UK in November 1971, but not until January 1972 in the US, a delay that was due to the fact that the Yes album was still selling very well over there, and for US fans it did seem worth the wait, and it reached number 4 in the Billboard chart and very much solidified that country's love affair with this band.
And I don't know why.
To my ears, the strength of Fragile is in its arrangements. Wakeman's arrival and the success of the Yes album really gave this band the confidence to reach out in what they were doing and create more space to allow the tracks to breathe more and allow the subtleties to be noticed. Marking the end of the band's beginning, Fragile is something of a transitional album. There are times when it does feel a little awkward and rushed, and there's an argument that it lacks the Yes album's friendly, memorable melodies and hippie warmth. In saying that, Fragile does create an extra edge, angle and dimension to this band, the sound of a confident, dynamic young group of stellar musicians working as a tight team and simply having fun. That is, of course, before this lineup of the band started to think about things too deeply and argue about things too much, veering ever closer to the edge before sailing off into uncharted oceans.
Children from a far and distant land to see America, and the golden sun of freedom filtered down to us in America.